Hi, everybody. So I'm a PhD student in McGill's Pulse Breeding and Genetics Lab, and you may be asking yourself, what's a pulse? Pulses are a group of crops including dry beans, chickpeas, lentils, and peas. In addition to being a staple in diets all over the world, pulses are growing in popularity as a source of protein as we move away from heavy meat consumption, and they're also growing in popularity as a wheat alternative in products like pasta and crackers. They've also been identified as a tool for combating dietary-related illnesses, so there are huge health and also economic benefits to growing the pulse sector in Canada. One study reported that between 1900 and 2020, there was this steady increase in dry bean yield, so we're able to produce more and more beans every year. And I wanted to ask the audience what we think might be causing this upward trend in the amount of beans we're producing. Any ideas?
More people are plant-based.
Sure, more people are plant-based, higher demand. The other ideas?
Health benefits.
Sure. So fertilizers. So yeah, great ideas. All those things certainly are factors. We have definitely better fertilizers and pesticides going into our fields. Farmers are adopting better soil and crop management practices. And hopefully the plants themselves are also kind of gaining an inherent genetic value, right? And as plant breeders, we want to be sure that it's the plants themselves that are actually improving, not these external factors. And the good news is that yield has been increasing, but the bad news is it's not increasing fast enough to meet the growing demand. So how can we improve our plants to make sure we meet the growing need for these crops? We'll start by talking about the phenotype, because that's what we can observe and measure. The phenotype is just a physical expression of a trait, such as how many pods the bean plant produces, or how resistant is it to a certain disease. The phenotype is, of course, impacted by the genotype, or the genetic makeup of an individual. And there's also an environmental factor, like local conditions and stressors. So we can define the phenotype as sort of a function of the genotype, the environment, and the interaction of the genotype and the environment. When we're breeding plants, we traditionally select on the phenotype. We have a pool of candidates and we pick the ones that look the best. But this is sort of an indirect way to select on the genotypes that we want, because we have this added layer of abstraction with environmental conditions. But what if we could select on genotypes directly and get to the heart of the desired genetics that we're looking for in our crops? And this is where machine learning comes in. How can machine learning help us to feed the world and meet the growing demand on our farm fields? Genomic selection is a breeding technology that actually allows us to select on genotypes instead of phenotypes. And when we're breeding our plants, we want to see that with each successive breeding cycle, we're moving the mean phenotypic value of our plants in the desired direction. So maybe this is an increase in yield, an increase in disease resistance, an increase in the ability to tolerate drought, things like that. So how does machine learning work, and how do we use it in a breeding program? Step one is to train a prediction model. So we'll give our model genotypes and phenotypes together, and the model will learn the relationship between these two things. Genotype data is becoming increasingly high resolution, and the relationship between genotypes and phenotypes can be kind of complicated. So we rely on machine learning models to sort of untangle that genotype-phenotype relationship. Typically, we have a validation step where we give our trained model genotypes with known phenotypes on the other end. We have our model predict phenotypes, and then we see how well the true and estimated values compare. And then finally, we can implement our model and actually carry out selection. So we will feed our model genotypes of selection candidates, make our selections based on genotypes, and hopefully have faster, more efficient cultivar improvement. Right now in my research, we're sort of between the validation and implementation step, and I've run several simulation studies, and some of the results look like this. We have 3 breeding cycles, and we are mapping cumulative gain in yield over time. And we can see that with genomic selection, the machine learning method in blue, the gains in yield are consistently higher than traditional phenotypic selection. Now, this isn't always the case. Sometimes these lines are flipped, and that's because we need to train a model well. And that's part of our work, optimizing these models to make good predictions. There are tons of benefits to be gained from implementing genomic selection in the breeding program. Traditional selection is extremely resource intensive. It can take up to 10 years to release a new cultivar to farmers. We use hectares and hectares of land every year to observe our selection candidates, and it's very costly. But with genomic selection, it's much faster because we don't have to observe the phenotypic expression, we can just genotype. We can do a lot of this work in the greenhouse, so we take up less space, and therefore it's a lot cheaper. In the past, I've spent several years working in organic vegetable production, where the production methods were kind of focused on the traditional practices of the past. And while there certainly is a lot to be gained from studying these traditional methods, I think that we can also gain a lot by harnessing tech tools to feed the world sustainably. Thank you.